Hello guys and welcome back. So we just passed the 4-year anniversary of Borderlands The Pre-Sequel, and I think enough time has passed to cover what happened with the game, the good, the bad, and the impact that it had on Gearbox following the game. Borderlands The Pre-Sequel had to follow up the critically acclaimed and commercial success that was Borderlands 2, and why I think that the game does deserve a second chance in 2018. Also, we'll talk about what Gearbox should learn from this moving forward. But before I start, the thumbnail is from a website, digit.in. I'll link their page down below if you guys want to check that out. So with that, let's get right into it. So to start, let's break down some of the history of the game right at the beginning when the game was announced. So we go back to April 9, 2014. Gearbox successfully pulled off a surprise release. On that day, they released an update on the Gearbox software website along with an announcement trailer. The post basically announced that the game was going to be co-produced by Gearbox Software and 2K Australia. It was going to be available for the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. Also at that time, they announced all 4 playable characters: Athena the Gladiator, Nisha the Lawbringer, Claptrap the Frag Trap, and Wilhelm the Enforcer. And also a lot of features were announced that made fans very excited. We got cryo weapons, more mobility with the double jump. They brought back fan favorite characters like Claptrap, and we even got laser weapons. So a lot of it seemed good right from the start. Gearbox came out, they knew what they were doing. So Borderlands fans were excited about the game. Early on, also a really smart move is Gearbox was working with the content creators at the time, which the biggest ones were Baru and Gathalion, to get fans excited and spread some of the good information. I'll see if I can find the video. If I can, I'll link it down below. But I remember that Goth and Baru were both brought out to a PAX show or some gaming convention to play the game, and it was the area where you would fight the bosun. It's really combat heavy. It has actual boss mechanics. And there's the chest at the end. Basically, it's a really good area to show people. So I remember at the time seeing that, and Goth and Baru were giving it heavy praise, saying it was great. And then actually later on, they kind of felt bad for leading on the community to this game when it did not end up living up to the hype and what Gearbox was showing people. So the game started out having everything going for it in the marketing. They were working with content creators. They had the features that people wanted. And it seemed like it should have been another home run for Gearbox, but that didn't happen. So what went wrong? Well, right from the start, fans, and even more so the general audience, just couldn't get over how similar the game was to Borderlands 2. It was all in the same engine, and people were always confused if this was a full release title or just another DLC for Borderlands 2. The issue wasn't helped by the fact that the last story campaign DLC for Borderlands 2, Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon's Keep,
the end,
ended with a cliffhanger implying that the next DLC was going to take the characters to the Hyperion moon base.
That was honestly pretty fun.
Hey guys, that spy just coughed up the access codes to the Hyperion moon base. Anybody feel like blowing up a space station?
Hell yes I do!
So instead, when this game was announced, people were confused, and a lot of articles and questions people asked if they would be able to transfer their saves up to this new game, how it would work, if progress would transfer over. So obviously, Gearbox did not do a good job of conveying the message of what this new game was. And the whole idea of a pre-sequel still confuses people to this day. Back in the day, I used to get so many comments about how the game fits in the timeline, and especially with the cutscenes that jump forward past Borderlands 2, it's super confusing and a lot of people just don't understand it still. So, as we know, this game was a sequel to Borderlands 1 and a prequel to Borderlands 2. So it means that we didn't get to blow up the moon base, which was hinted at in that Tiny Tina DLC, and Gearbox basically set it up so we're going to spend all this time with these characters who don't make it into the next game because we kill both Nisha and Wilhelm in Borderlands 2. So it's hard to get too attached when you know they're not going to come back, their story doesn't continue, and when you get to Borderlands 2, they have such small roles, it just really feels unimpactful. and it kind of ruins the experience for a lot of people that get super invested in their characters when playing. Then another thing I have to mention is when we got the game, the idea of reskin legendary weapons. I understand that the last gen consoles had memory limitations and Gearbox was always trying to work around them and add as much gameplay to the game as possible, but this was one thing that just always didn't sit right with me and felt really lazy. Instead of trying to distinguish themselves from Borderlands 2, they leaned into it way too much, and it made the game feel cheap and not as special when a legendary weapon did drop. Because people would just think of, oh, that's the Borderlands 2 weapon, I know what that does, and would be let down. So it really lost a lot of the impact on players when they did get a good weapon and it was something they've seen before, even if the effect might have been slightly different. This, along with the bland level design, ruined the gameplay for a lot of people. The areas were either too large and didn't feel full enough, or they just didn't feel competent enough. It was a lot of fetch quests and just running through these huge maps to get somewhere with really no consistency to the levels and levels that felt different enough. And yes, the areas were colorful, but that doesn't mean more meaningful than, let's say, the brown color scheme, which was really boring and really bad in Borderlands 1. But the areas were created better and they felt different. And even now, you could show a lot of the dedicated fans certain areas and they would automatically know what enemies to expect, the map, where the chests are in that level, and the pre-sequel just never really caught off the ground with that. And the last thing I want to touch on with the gameplay is the lack of farming for gear and overall endgame. And this is basically the biggest problem people had with the game, because there wasn't any endgame. I do not know the thought process that led Gearbox or 2K to believe it was okay to have non-farmable bosses in a Borderlands game. So once you passed the story mission, you couldn't go back and fight them, even if they did have legendary gear assigned to them to drop. Not to mention, there were only a handful of important bosses throughout the story anyways, along with a few raid bosses that really didn't drop anything worth going for and never really felt special. So obviously this did not sit well with the Borderlands fans at all, and it didn't take long for the good word of mouth to slowly turn sour in the community and get to the general audience. And it really halted and slowed the game's momentum. And I'm saying this as a fan. I don't think it was a bad game. I would even argue it's a good game, but compared to the rest of the Borderlands series, it definitely felt lackluster. So let's get into what makes the game good and what Gearbox and the community have done to fix the game. So everyone can agree that this game had the strongest story out of all the main entries in the Borderlands series. It's a hero's journey and it's definitely worth playing through at least once, which became the game's unofficial community slogan, play through it at least once, which is such an awful thing to hear for a Borderlands game, but it was true. Along with the story, the game also has arguably one of the best DLC campaigns, right up there with Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon's Keep, which was the Claptastic Voyage. And it's awesome to play through. The glitch weapons were a cool addition, and you can tell that a lot of love went into changing some of the fan favorite areas from the earlier games into this glitch world, and everything just felt really thought out. The enemies, the bosses, the story, it just felt like a complete experience for the first time in this game. Along with the new Slaughter Dome, which actually has its own difficulty modifier and really provides the only real endgame challenge in the game. So overall, there was so much to do, so much content, but unfortunately by this point, a lot of people never stuck around long enough to even make it or play it. Another thing I want to mention with the good is the balance of the game was great. For the most part, it took the best parts of Borderlands 1 and then mixed them with Borderlands 2. It never really got too difficult while playing, but I think that's more on Gearbox and 2K for not having any true endgame content to play with. So just fighting basic enemies, of course it's not going to be as difficult in this game. Another thing that I think made it pretty easy is that the characters were made really, really well, and the skill trees made more sense compared to any other Borderlands game. The skills actually have synergies with each other, so it's worth speccing almost into entire skill trees to get everything to work together, and it gave so much more variability in builds because you didn't just have to stick with one endgame build. You could go into what you wanted, you could build what you wanted, you could try what you wanted because your character was strong enough to handle it and to see what these new skills could do. So yes, difficulty I would say is a good. People still debate that, but for the most part, for the general audience, I would say that was a plus. So we've heard the good, we've heard the bad. Now, what about the aftermath of this game? And so 2K Australia was shut down following this game, and I think it was a wake-up call for Gearbox when making Borderlands 3. With the recent Steam sales numbers that were leaked, we can see how this was the lowest selling Borderlands game, besides Tales from the Borderlands, which doesn't really count. The pre-sequel to date has only sold half of what Borderlands 1 has, which shouldn't be the case after all the goodwill the franchise has gathered and all the fans they've built up over the years. And not only this, but then after the low sales numbers, after 2K Australia was shut down, they even decided to hurt fans more and cheat players basically out of our season pass. Instead of the traditional Borderlands 4 campaign DLCs that are usually part of a season pass like Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2, they instead released 2 characters, an arena, and then 1 story DLC, which is obviously, we're not going to act like it wasn't due to low sales and how the game was received, but it left a bad taste in the mouth for all the players who wanted to stand up for it, who wanted to argue that the game was getting better and that it was worth coming back. And what's even worse is that we have seen already from leaked pictures and from ArtStation accounts that another story DLC was being worked on, called Luxie's Space Adventure, which never saw the light of day, but assets were being made, and it was an early production phase, so obviously they did want to have at least 2 story DLCs, but just were never given the opportunity. Randy Pitchford has even mentioned after this that this is why they're trying to take their time with Borderlands 3. He said they could rush out another pre-sequel, but they want to make sure to get things right, and obviously the 2-year wait between Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel isn't enough development time, even with the help of another studio, which was 2K Australia. And Gearbox did do their best to fix the game. They worked on patches for the game up until the last one in 2016. So I think Gearbox knew at the end that they made a mistake, and this was just going to have to be something that they lived with and learned from for the future. Something else that's really helped the game that I have to mention, even if it's only available for PC players, is mods like the community patch, which adds hundreds of features into the game. More farming, more bosses to farm, more gear, more fast travel locations. It's more quality of life than a mod. It feels like something that should have been in there from the beginning, even if you take out all the character tweaks and everything like that, and just take in quality of life. It's such a good change for the game, and it makes the game feel more complete than it ever has before. And it's still to this day how I play it. I'll log on, turn on the community patch, and play around, starting new characters. So overall, I think that this game deserves a second chance. This is by no means a bad game. I recently have spent a lot of time going back and playing through with a few different characters, and realized how fresh the game felt to me, because I never grinded the same way with the game that I did Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 1. So every time I go back, I still forget certain story missions. I find new side missions. I get new legendary drops that I've never seen before just because I never put the time into the game that I think it deserves now looking back. And the ending always gets me excited for what's to come in the future and reminds me that this is all tied together. Whether we like it or not, this is a part of the franchise. And I would always argue that this game deserves more love than what it got. And that 4 years later, looking back, yes, there were some problems starting out, but there was also so much goodwill, and Gearbox tried to fix it, and with the community patch, or even just playing without it, it's definitely worth going back. But let me know what you guys think. Will you guys pick back up the pre-sequel, maybe give it a second chance following the 4-year anniversary, or are you just going to wait until future games are released? Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and see you guys in the next one.